Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey across mountains and centuries. Tonight, we will trace the footsteps of an ambitious explorer who set out to find a lost city hidden in the high cloud forests of Peru. It is a story of determination, curiosity, and a meeting of old legends with the modern world. Join me as we uncover how Hiram Bingham, professor, adventurer, and accidental archaeologist, brought Machu Picchu from obscurity into the light of history. Let's begin. Finding the Forgotten Citadel, Bingham's Journey to Machu Picchu. Chapter 1. The Seed of an Obsession. In the early years of the 20th century, the world was shrinking under the relentless advance of railroads, telegraphs, and steamships. Yet there were still blank spaces on the maps, unclaimed, unknown, unsolved. To a restless scholar named Hiram Bingham, these uncharted corners whispered promises of discovery. Born in 1875 in Honolulu to missionary parents, Bingham had grown up straddling worlds. Between the old religious convictions of his family and the modern ambitions he would later pursue. After earning degrees at Yale and Harvard, he became a lecturer in South American history at Yale University. But books and lectures soon began to feel insufficient. He wanted to see the places he taught about, to touch the stones and read the landscapes for himself. In 1908, he traveled to South America for the first time. Though his original plan was to study Simón Bolívar's campaigns, he was quickly swept up in the aura of Peru's Andes. Everywhere he looked were relics of ancient empires. Stone terraces climbing mountain slopes, crumbling walls etched with mysterious symbols. Locals spoke of ruins deeper in the jungle, cities abandoned to moss and vines after the Spanish conquest. Some said there were treasures still hidden in the cloud forests, where the Incas had fled to escape Pizarro's armies. Others believed entire citadels had vanished in a legend. Among these rumors, one name surfaced again and again: Vila Bamba. According to chroniclers, Vila Bamba was the last refuge of the Inca emperors after the fall of Cusco. For nearly 40 years, it had resisted Spanish efforts to subdue it. Some accounts placed it deep beyond the Urubamba River, high on steep ridges where the jungle swallowed all traces of stone. Bingham was intrigued. If he could locate the final stronghold of the Incas, it would be a discovery to rival any in the Americas. Yet he knew that no serious expedition had yet pinpointed its location. The official histories were scattered, the maps contradictory. There was no guarantee Vila Bamba existed as described, or that it still stood at all. After returning to Yale, Bingham could not shake the idea. He pored over Spanish chronicles, translated old letters, and studied the earliest maps drawn by conquistadors. Each fragment only deepened the mystery. He began to sketch plans for a new expedition, one that would push beyond the known trails into the unexplored valleys of the Andes. In 1911, funding came together at last. The Peruvian government offered permits, and Yale University provided sponsorship, hoping the expedition might bring back valuable artifacts and knowledge. Bingham assembled a team of guides, muleteers, and scientific collaborators. Among them were geologist Isaiah Bowman and surgeon Clarence Hay. Their goal was officially to document ancient roads and settlements in the Urubamba Valley. But in Bingham's heart, the real mission was simpler: to find Vila Bamba, or some trace of the lost Inca civilization that had inspired generations of explorers. On July 14, 1911, the expedition left Cusco, winding their way into the steep river valleys. They followed trails etched by centuries of travelers, traders, soldiers, missionaries. As they climbed, the air grew thin, the ridges sharper. From the heights, they could look back and see the imperial city of Cusco dwindling into a pattern of brown roofs and stone streets. Ahead stretched the unknown. Their path took them past Ollantaytambo, where massive walls of precisely cut stone still stood, testament to the Inca mastery of masonry. In these ruins, Bingham felt as if he were touching the edge of something greater, a civilization whose ingenuity had outlasted conquest and time itself. But Ollantaytambo was only the beginning. To find any remnant of Vila Bamba, they would have to cross the roaring Urubamba River and ascend into the cloud forests, a landscape both breathtaking and treacherous. At night, Bingham sat by the fire with his guides, listening to stories of hidden cities and sacred places. The Quechua-speaking villagers described stairways that led into the mists, stone terraces that seemed to grow from the cliffs. They spoke of a place called Machu Picchu, Old Peak, perched high above the river, wrapped in orchids and fog. Most travelers dismissed these tales as exaggeration, but Bingham felt a spark of recognition. Could Machu Picchu be part of the forgotten Vila Bamba? Or perhaps another settlement entirely, one never recorded by Spanish chroniclers? As dawn broke over the Andean ridges, he resolved to find out for himself. Whatever waited beyond the river, he knew it was worth the risk. In that moment, the scholar became an explorer, and the legend of Machu Picchu began to stir back to life. In the next chapter, we will follow Bingham as he crosses into the cloud forest, step by step, toward a discovery that would astonish the world. Chapter 2. Into the Cloud Forest. The descent from Ollantaytambo into the Urubamba Valley was like stepping into another world. From the dry, wind-swept heights of the Andean Plateau, the expedition entered a narrow canyon where the river carved deep through jungle-choked mountains. Mist clung to every ridge. Giant ferns leaned over the trail. Orchids burst from the rock faces in sudden, brilliant bloom. To reach the place called Machu Picchu, Hiram Bingham had to abandon his mule and proceed on foot. The path was barely more than a thread, winding between boulders, crossing wooden bridges slick with moss, and hugging the edges of cliffs that fell away into whitewater. The rains had made everything slippery. One misstep could mean a fall of hundreds of feet. Local guides accompanied the group, Quechua-speaking farmers and hunters who had lived in the shadow of these ridges all their lives. Among them was Melchor Artiga, a farmer from the nearby village of Mandor-Pampa. When Bingham asked about Inca ruins, Artiga said yes, there were stone walls in the mountains, not far above the river. Few outsiders had ever visited them. On the morning of July 24, 1911, Artiga agreed to take Bingham across the Urubamba. They waded the river by rope and reached the opposite bank soaked but determined. The jungle rose before them in green walls. There was no marked trail. Only the memory of footpaths and Artiga's quiet confidence guided their ascent. With them was Pablito Alvarez, an 11-year-old boy whose family lived on a mountainside. As the group climbed, the boy ran ahead, nimbly hopping from stone to stone, until he paused beside a thick curtain of vines. There, hidden under layers of vegetation, were the first steps of a stone staircase. The sight stopped Bingham in his tracks. The staircase wound up the ridge in perfect symmetry, cut from the bedrock, and still solid despite centuries of abandonment. He brushed away the moss, revealing stone joints so tight no blade of grass had entered them. Higher up, terraces emerged from the forest, shaped like long green lips stretching along the curve of the mountain. They climbed for nearly an hour, and then, through a break in the mist, the city appeared. It was unlike anything Bingham had ever seen. Dozens of stone buildings stood in silent order. Houses, temples, storage rooms, each built with precision and purpose. Some had doorways still intact. Others had trapezoidal windows looking out onto steep ravines. Everything had been made from granite, quarried and shaped on site. The surrounding ridges rose in jagged waves, and behind them loomed Huayna Picchu, the young peak standing like a sentinel over the city. From every angle, the site was cloaked in dramatic beauty, its walls tangled in vines, its steps worn smooth by the passage of time. For a moment, no one spoke. The jungle hummed around them, the mist curled between the stones, and Bingham realized he had found something extraordinary. Not merely the remains of a settlement, but a city suspended between earth and sky. He wrote in his journal that night, "It seemed like a dream, a sight surpassing anything I had imagined." The sight of those ruined walls, hidden for centuries above the valley floor, was the moment I knew I had found a lost city. But what city had he found? Was this the Vila Bamba of legend, or something else entirely? The ruins were not burned or torn down as Spanish-conquered cities often were. They showed no signs of war or hasty abandonment. Instead, it seemed Machu Picchu had simply been left behind, forgotten by history and untouched by outsiders. Bingham began to sketch the layout. He paced the corridors, mapping the streets, counting the terraces. He found ceremonial stones, intricate drainage systems, and channels that brought spring water into fountains. Everything suggested a city built with deep care and knowledge. Among the most striking features was the Intihuatana, a carved stone believed to have astronomical significance. Its angles aligned with solstices and equinoxes. Priests may have used it to mark the passing of seasons, to read the sky, and perhaps to hold ceremonies linked to the sun. The more he saw, the more Bingham realized Machu Picchu was not merely a fortress or a hideout. It was a planned site, possibly sacred, built high above the world and integrated into the very shape of the mountain itself. But the mystery deepened. None of the Spanish chroniclers had described this place. There was no mention in the conquest records. Could an entire city have escaped the notice of history? Or had it been deliberately kept secret, known only to a few, hidden even in its own time? Back at camp, the team began to discuss theories. Was this a royal retreat, perhaps built for Pachacuti, the emperor who first expanded the Inca realm into a true empire in the 15th century? Or was it a religious sanctuary, a pilgrimage site for sun worshippers? The presence of agricultural terraces and housing for hundreds suggested that Machu Picchu had once supported a stable population. Yet its location, so high, so remote, made daily life here difficult. There were no large open plazas like those found in Cusco, and the streets were narrow and intimate. It seemed designed for a specific group of people, not for the masses. Bingham's mind raced. If this place had truly been unknown to the outside world, it meant he stood on the threshold of rewriting a part of Andean history. But he also knew the discovery raised more questions than answers. In the days that followed, the team documented as much as they could. Clarence Hay took photographs, and Isaiah Bowman recorded topographical notes. They collected ceramic shards, bronze tools, and fragments of textiles, all carefully labeled for transport back to Yale. But the jungle was already reclaiming what had been revealed. Each night, vines crept silently over the stones. Each morning, the mist returned, veiling the city once again in mystery. Bingham knew that without support, the ruins might vanish again. He needed funding, attention, and international recognition to preserve the site. He had found a forgotten city, but now came the greater challenge, proving to the world what it was and why it mattered. In the next chapter, we will follow Bingham's return to Cusco, the first news of the discovery, and how a single journey would ignite global fascination with the lost city in the clouds. Chapter 3. The Return to Cusco. The morning after the first survey of Machu Picchu, Bingham rose before dawn. The mists had thinned, revealing the contours of the citadel in a wash of gray light. In those quiet hours, he walked the narrow terraces, trying to commit every angle to memory. He knew that when he returned to Cusco, his account would be met with curiosity, but also skepticism. Before leaving, he instructed his guides to help him clear a few key paths, so future expeditions could return more easily. Then, reluctantly, he began the descent. The trail was no less treacherous in daylight. Roots knotted the path, and rain from the night before had turned the rocks into a slick mosaic. Crossing the Urubamba River again felt like emerging from another era. By the time Bingham rejoined the rest of his party, the jungle had already swallowed much of what they had uncovered. It struck him how quickly nature reclaimed what humans abandoned. He carried with him a notebook bulging with sketches, measurements, and impressions. There were also photographic plates, images he hoped would prove the reality of what he'd seen. But even with all this evidence, he understood that the story he was about to tell sounded like legend. The trek back to Cusco took several days. The path wound past the familiar landmarks. Ollantaytambo's fortress-like terraces, the quiet villages where Quechua families still tended fields much as their ancestors had. Every stop became an opportunity for Bingham to ask more questions. Had anyone heard of a place called Machu Picchu? Had travelers reported stone ruins hidden above the river? Again and again, the answers were vague. Some villagers nodded knowingly, others shrugged. The citadel seemed to exist in the collective memory as a whisper rather than a fact. When at last Bingham arrived in Cusco, he was exhausted but elated. He sought out officials of the Peruvian government to share his findings. They listened politely, intrigued by the photographs, but cautious about endorsing his claim that he had discovered a lost city. In those first days, Bingham realized he was caught in a delicate balance. If he oversold the discovery, he risked being dismissed as another treasure hunter chasing myths. But if he was too cautious, he might fail to secure the support needed to study and preserve the site. He began to write dispatches to his sponsors at Yale and to potential backers in the United States. In these letters, he described Machu Picchu in vivid detail, a city hidden in the clouds, untouched by the conquistadors, a place where the Inca spirit seemed still to linger in the stones. His words carried conviction. They conjured images of a civilization that had flourished in isolation, a final refuge that the Spanish chroniclers had somehow overlooked. Yet not everyone in Cusco shared his excitement. Some local officials argued that the ruins had been known to villagers for generations, and thus could hardly be called a discovery. Bingham, for his part, never claimed he was the first human to set foot there. What he insisted was that he was the first to recognize Machu Picchu's importance to history and to bring it to the world's attention. To strengthen his case, he arranged for more photographs and a detailed survey. In the meantime, he hired porters to transport artifacts and notes back down the Andes to the coast, where they would be shipped to Yale. Among these crates were pottery shards, metal tools, and fragments of textile, small clues to the daily life of the city's long-vanished residents. The reaction in Lima was mixed. Some newspapers praised Bingham's courage, calling him an American scholar who had revealed Peru's hidden heritage. Others hinted at exploitation, suggesting that the artifacts should remain in the country rather than be shipped abroad. Bingham knew he was stepping into a debate much larger than himself. Archaeology, in that era, was tangled with colonial attitudes. Foreign universities often regarded ancient sites as repositories for their own museums. But in Bingham's mind, the primary goal was preservation and study. If Machu Picchu was to be recognized for what it was, it needed to be documented, cataloged, and protected. With funds still uncertain, he returned briefly to the United States to raise support. There, his photographs and first-hand accounts caused a sensation. Publications such as National Geographic began to plan features about the lost city of the Incas. Sponsors came forward to fund a larger expedition. In the autumn of 1911, Bingham boarded a ship back to Peru, determined to continue what he had begun. This time, he would bring a larger team, surveyors, photographers, and scientists prepared to spend months at the site. Before departing, he gave a series of lectures, describing Machu Picchu's terraces rising out of the jungle, its temples aligned to the sun, its air of hushed mystery. He spoke of the first moment he had climbed the stairs and seen the city, revealed how it felt to stand in a place the modern world had overlooked. Audiences were enthralled. The discovery tapped into something deeper, a hunger for stories of uncharted places, for evidence that the world still held secrets. In an era when many believed there were no frontiers left to cross, Machu Picchu reminded people that the past was still waiting to be rediscovered. Yet as he prepared to return, Bingham knew the work ahead would be far more difficult than the first visit. The site needed careful excavation and interpretation. It needed protection from looters and the relentless jungle. And it needed to be understood not merely as a curiosity, but as part of Peru's cultural heritage. Standing on the deck of the steamer as it pulled away from New York Harbor, he wondered how history would judge him. Would he be remembered as an explorer, a scholar, or something less flattering, a man who had taken too much liberty in claiming discovery? The answers lay high in the Andes, where Machu Picchu waited under its veil of cloud. Whatever came next, Bingham knew one thing for certain. His life had been irrevocably altered by that hidden citadel. In the next chapter, we will join the second expedition, an ambitious effort to document, excavate, and bring Machu Picchu into the light of global scholarship. Chapter 4. The Great Expedition begins. The year was 1912, and the second expedition to Machu Picchu was underway. This time, Hiram Bingham returned with more than curiosity. He carried the weight of expectation. The world was eager to see if his claims of a lost Inca city would stand up to scrutiny. He arrived in Peru with a full scientific team: archaeologists, topographers, photographers, and assistants. Their mission was to document every detail of the site and to search for evidence that would explain why Machu Picchu was built and why it had been abandoned. Among the new recruits was Harry Foote, a skilled photographer sent to capture images that would be reproduced in academic journals and newspapers. Another important figure was Herbert Spindin, an archaeologist who had studied Maya ruins in Central America. Together, they formed a group that blended scholarship and adventure, determined to bring the city into the annals of science. The journey from Cusco to Machu Picchu followed the same grueling path Bingham had taken before. They traveled by mule across high passes and then descended into the green canyon of the Vila Bamba. Unlike the first visit, the expedition now relied on dozens of laborers to carry equipment: cameras, measuring tools, tents, crates for artifacts, and supplies to last for months. At every village they passed, Bingham and his companions were greeted with curiosity and sometimes suspicion. Rumors had begun to swirl about the Americans' intentions. Some locals feared the expedition meant to take their ancestors' treasures away for good. Bingham took pains to explain that he was there to study, not to plunder. But he could not deny that his plans included removing selected artifacts to Yale, where they would be preserved and analyzed. He promised to respect the site and return what he could, though he also believed that international institutions were best equipped to safeguard ancient objects. When they reached the foot of Machu Picchu, the scale of the work ahead became clear. Vines and moss had reclaimed nearly everything. The terraces were buried in centuries of soil and vegetation. Many walls were hidden beneath layers of earth. The first task was to clear the site systematically. Bingham hired local Quechua workers to help, paying them daily wages. Dozens of men set to work with machetes, shovels, and pickaxes, peeling back the jungle 1 foot at a time. Day by day, the city revealed itself. What at first seemed like a handful of buildings turned out to be a vast complex of more than 200 structures. There were residential quarters arranged along narrow streets. There were temples with niches carved into their walls. There were fountains that still trickled with water, fed by hidden channels from mountain springs. At the city's highest point stood the Intihuatana, the ritual stone that Bingham believed had astronomical functions. It was unlike any monument he had seen elsewhere. He wondered if priests had gathered around it at dawn to chart the progress of the sun and offer prayers for harvests. Photographer Harry Foote worked tirelessly, capturing the progress of the excavation. His glass plate negatives would soon become some of the most famous images of Machu Picchu, black and white glimpses of a place that seemed to belong more to legend than to the modern world. While the workers cleared debris, Bingham and Spindin began studying pottery fragments and burial sites. In shallow graves along the terraces, they found skeletons, some of women, others of children. The remains suggested that the population had not been a large military garrison, but rather families who lived here year-round. The ceramics and tools they uncovered hinted at everyday life: cooking, weaving, farming. Bronze chisels showed the skill of Inca artisans who had cut the granite blocks with precision. Traces of maize and quinoa confirmed that the terraces had been used to grow food to sustain the community. As weeks passed, a clearer picture emerged. Machu Picchu seemed to have been a royal estate, perhaps built for Emperor Pachacuti, who ruled in the 15th century. The city's layout, a ceremonial core surrounded by agricultural terraces, matched what was known of Inca planning. Yet it remained unique in its setting and in the completeness of its preservation. One puzzle lingered. Why had it been abandoned? No evidence of warfare or burning appeared in the ruins. Bingham speculated that after the fall of the Inca Empire to the Spanish, Machu Picchu's residents simply left, either to avoid detection or because the network of support from Cusco had collapsed. He recorded these thoughts in his journals, which grew thicker by the day with observations, sketches, and ideas. At night, Bingham sat in his tent, a lantern glowing over his notes, trying to reconcile what he had seen with what he knew of history. He felt both exhilaration and burden. He understood that in claiming this discovery, he was shaping how the world would see Machu Picchu, and, by extension, the Inca civilization itself. But he also felt a deeper, more personal connection to the place. Standing among the terraces in the early morning fog, he sometimes had the sensation of walking in a city still alive, a city that had never truly died but merely waited for someone to listen. The team labored through the dry season. As the work advanced, they began to appreciate the ingenuity behind every aspect of the citadel's design. The terraces weren't simply for farming. They also stabilized the mountainside, preventing landslides. The water channels ensured fresh water reached every household. The orientation of buildings respected both astronomical alignments and the natural contours of the ridge. By the time the rains returned in late 1912, the site had been transformed. Where once there was only dense vegetation, there now stood a city in clear relief, a testament to the artistry and ambition of the Inca. Bingham prepared to leave Machu Picchu again, knowing that their findings would soon make headlines. He had the photographs, the measurements, and the artifacts to prove that the discovery was real. Yet even with so much revealed, Machu Picchu held its secrets close. He felt certain that its meaning would be debated for generations to come. For Bingham, that was part of the allure. A place that asked more questions than it answered was a place worthy of wonder. In the next chapter, we will follow Bingham as he returns to the United States and faces the reception of a world eager to learn about the lost city in the clouds. Chapter 5. The World Takes Notice. When Hiram Bingham finally left Machu Picchu at the close of 1912, the rainy season had begun to reclaim the terraces and cover the stones in a green haze once more. But unlike his first departure, he carried with him something more powerful than rumors: evidence. In his crates and bundles were hundreds of artifacts, ceramics, metal tools, bone fragments, and woven textiles. Alongside them were dozens of glass plate negatives that captured the grandeur of the city from every angle. He had measured every wall, traced every channel, and filled his journals with descriptions. The journey back to Lima was long and arduous. Pack animals strained under the weight of scientific equipment and relics. Bingham knew that every day the crates spent on muddy trails or river barges risked damage to their precious contents. But eventually, everything arrived safely on the coast, where it would be loaded on a ships bound for New Haven, Connecticut. By the time Bingham reached the United States, news of Machu Picchu was already spreading. He had sent letters to colleagues and sponsors describing his findings, but nothing compared to the impact of the photographs. The images revealed a city that seemed more like a myth. Temples perched on knife-edged ridges, terraces cascading down green mountainsides, stairways dissolving into mist. The first public glimpse came in 1913 when National Geographic magazine devoted an entire issue to Bingham's expedition. Its pages overflowed with photographs and engravings, accompanied by Bingham's own vivid prose. He described Machu Picchu as a lost city, a phrase that captured the imagination of readers across America and Europe. For a world that believed all the great discoveries had already been made, Machu Picchu felt like a revelation. Newspapers hailed Bingham as an explorer in the tradition of Livingstone and Stanley. Academics debated whether the site could truly be called lost if local people had always known it was there. But most agreed on one point: this was among the most significant archaeological finds in the Americas. In lecture halls from Boston to San Francisco, Bingham projected lantern slides of the citadel. He described the Inca stonework, so precise it needed no mortar, and the ceremonial stones that likely marked solstices and equinoxes. His words transported audiences to a place where civilization had flourished above the clouds, hidden from the conquistadors who destroyed so much else. Yet a claim brought controversy. Critics questioned whether Bingham should have removed so many artifacts from Peru. Some Peruvian officials accused him of overstepping his permits. They argued that Machu Picchu was part of their national heritage and that its treasures should remain on Peruvian soil. Bingham defended himself in the press, insisting that his intent was preservation, not exploitation. He argued that Yale's resources could protect and study the finds in ways that Peru, at that time, could not. But the disagreement foreshadowed decades of debate over ownership, debates that would continue long after Bingham's death. In the months that followed, he published Inca Land, a book blending memoir and scholarship. It was part adventure story, part academic report, and it quickly became a bestseller. The public devoured his accounts of treacherous climbs, lost cities, and the enduring mystery of the Inca. Yet behind the enthusiasm, Bingham faced personal uncertainty. He was a historian by training, not an archaeologist. Some specialists questioned his conclusions about Machu Picchu's purpose. Was it truly the last refuge of the Inca? Or had it served another role, perhaps a royal estate, or a religious sanctuary dedicated to the worship of the sun? Bingham himself vacillated in his writings. In early reports, he linked the site to Vila Bamba, the last holdout of the Inca resistance. Later, he came to believe that Machu Picchu predated Vila Bamba and had been abandoned before the Spanish arrived. The truth was elusive, hidden beneath centuries of silence. His reputation, too, became a topic of debate. Was he a discoverer, or simply the first outsider to recognize Machu Picchu's significance? To Bingham, the distinction mattered less than the fact that the site had entered the world's imagination. He often wrote that Machu Picchu belonged to all humanity, that it was a reminder of what civilizations could achieve in harmony with nature. In the spring of 1915, Bingham returned once more to Peru with a smaller team. This time, the goal was to finalize maps and collect additional artifacts for study. But the political climate had shifted. Peruvian authorities imposed stricter controls, and local newspapers published editorials accusing foreigners of plunder. Bingham was not surprised. He knew that the story of Machu Picchu was no longer his alone to tell. It belonged to Peru, to the descendants of the Inca, to historians and archaeologists who would debate every stone. In a way, he welcomed this. Discovery, he believed, was only the beginning. Understanding would take generations. Back in New Haven, Yale began cataloging the thousands of objects shipped from the Andes. Students and scholars pored over the ceramics and textiles, searching for clues about daily life in the citadel. The photographs were reproduced in magazines and newspapers around the world, inspiring a new generation to study Peru's ancient civilizations. Even as war engulfed Europe in 1914, Machu Picchu remained a symbol of wonder and continuity, a place untouched by modern conflict. As Bingham settled into his role as a lecturer and author, he knew that no matter what controversies followed, his life had been transformed by the mountain citadel. He had glimpsed a world beyond the known, and that vision would never leave him. In the next chapter, we will return to the heights of Machu Picchu as scientists attempt to piece together how the Incas built their masterpiece and what it meant to those who called it home. Chapter 6, Stones That Endure. While Bingham defended his discoveries abroad, Machu Picchu itself remained quiet under the drifting clouds. Yet the city's silence was deceptive, for the ruins were beginning to reveal the secrets of their construction to the scholars who remained behind. One of the most enduring questions was, how did the Inca build such a place, so high in the mountains, with stones fitted so perfectly that even after centuries of earthquakes and rains, their walls still stood? The answer began with the material itself. Granite, quarried from the very flanks of the mountain. Unlike the softer limestones used elsewhere in the Andes, granite was exceptionally hard and durable. In the centuries before European contact, Inca masons had developed tools and techniques to work this stubborn stone with extraordinary skill. Archaeologists noted that the quarry lay only a short distance from the site itself, sparing builders the ordeal of dragging massive blocks across many miles. Even so, moving stones weighing several tons down narrow paths required ingenuity. They believed laborers used a combination of ramps, log rollers, and ropes braided from itchy grass. The work was not done by enslaved people, but by citizens fulfilling their mita, a system of rotational labor owed to the state. Once the blocks arrived, masons shaped them with bronze and stone hammers, tapping patiently along natural fracture lines. The most remarkable aspect was how each stone was carved to interlock perfectly with its neighbors. Rather than relying on mortar, the Inca had discovered that tight-fitting joints could withstand the shocks of earthquakes far better than rigid cemented walls. In the eastern sector of Machu Picchu, the area Bingham called the Sacred District, these methods reached their highest expression. Here, walls of astonishing precision enclosed what seemed to be temples and ceremonial spaces. The Temple of the Sun occupied a commanding position on a natural outcrop. It was built with semicircular walls embracing a large ceremonial stone. On certain days of the year, sunlight poured through a trapezoidal window to strike the stone precisely, an alignment scholars believed linked to the solstice. Nearby stood the royal tomb, a cave-like chamber Bingham initially thought might hold the remains of a great Inca. Later studies suggested it was more likely a ceremonial space connected to ancestor veneration. Yet, for all its monumental architecture, Machu Picchu also contained modest structures. In a residential district, simpler houses lined narrow alleys. Their walls were built of smaller, more irregular stones, functional rather than grand. Niches carved into these walls likely held household shrines or stored precious objects. Bingham's colleagues spent weeks documenting every detail, mapping each building's footprint and taking careful note of water channels, terraces, and stairways. One marvel was the drainage system. Despite being perched on a steep ridge, Machu Picchu never flooded. A network of channels and underground conduits carried away rainwater, preventing erosion and landslides. Modern engineers later described it as one of the most sophisticated water management systems ever built in a mountain settlement. Agricultural terraces covered much of the site's flanks. Not merely for crops, these terraces stabilized the slope, controlling the flow of water and preventing collapses. Soil analysis showed they were layered. Large stones on the bottom, gravel above that, then sandy earth mixed with topsoil. This design allowed excess water to drain efficiently while retaining enough moisture to nourish crops. These terraces produced maize, potatoes, and quinoa, staples of the Inca diet, and may have supported a population of 300 to 500 people. In the high season, when nobles and priests arrived, the number could have been higher. At the center of it all stood the Intihuatana, the ritual stone whose name means the hitching post of the sun. Scholars believed it functioned as a solar observatory, a ceremonial center, or both. Even Bingham, usually cautious in his interpretations, felt certain this stone held profound meaning. While the archaeologists worked, Quechua laborers continued clearing vegetation. Some locals began to share stories passed down through families, legends of royal visits, of sacred rituals, of a time when the stone walls echoed with voices. Though no written record survived to confirm these tales, they hinted at the emotional bond between people and place. In the evenings, the team gathered around cook fires to discuss their findings. Arguments flared over whether Machu Picchu had been primarily religious, residential, or defensive. No consensus emerged. Each discovery raised new questions. But the consensus was clear on one point. Machu Picchu had been built to last. The choice of location itself revealed foresight. The ridge between Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu was geologically stable, protected from landslides and earthquakes by the surrounding mountains. Its remoteness ensured security. Spanish chroniclers never mentioned it, suggesting the city escaped conquest not through walls but by isolation. For the Inca, the ridge was not merely a convenient platform, but a place of spiritual power. Mountains, Apis, were believed to be living beings, protectors of the people. Building the city here was both an act of devotion and a statement of mastery over nature. As the weeks turned into months, Bingham came to appreciate the depth of planning and faith that Machu Picchu embodied. These were not random ruins. They were a testament to a worldview in which landscape and architecture formed a single whole. By the time the second expedition drew to a close, the city was more visible than it had been for centuries. The terraces stood clear of brush, the temples shone in the morning light, and the water still ran in channels laid down by hands long vanished. Even in the early 20th century, with modern tools and knowledge, no one could fully explain how every detail had been achieved. The Incas had built with a combination of practical skill and spiritual conviction that left their legacy etched into the stone itself. When Bingham prepared to leave again, he felt a respect deeper than any he had felt for the classical ruins of Greece or Rome. In this hidden place above the clouds, a civilization had created something that defied time, disaster, and oblivion. In the next chapter, we will follow Bingham's efforts to interpret the meaning of Machu Picchu and how his theories shaped the world's understanding of the city. Chapter 7. Interpreting the Silent Stones. By the time Hiram Bingham returned to Yale in 1913, his mind was filled with the questions Machu Picchu posed. He had measured its walls, studied its terraces, and traced its aqueducts, yet he still struggled to define what this place had truly been. He began to prepare a comprehensive report. In his office, he pinned photographs to the walls and laid out sketches across long tables. Each image showed another piece of the puzzle. A carved niche here, a flight of stairs there, all hinting at a city whose purpose lay just beyond the reach of certainty. From the start, Bingham leaned toward a dramatic theory, that Machu Picchu was Vila Bamba, the last stronghold of the Inca resistance against the Spanish. Chroniclers had written of a refuge hidden deep in the jungle, a place where the final Inca lords held out for decades before succumbing to conquest. This interpretation appealed to the public imagination. It framed Machu Picchu as the setting of a heroic final chapter in Andean history. Bingham himself wrote articles describing the city as the cradle of the last Inca, confident that he had located the ultimate redoubt of the empire. Yet even as he advanced this claim, doubts arose. Other scholars noted that the site lacked the defensive fortifications one would expect of a military refuge. The walls, though sturdy, were not built for siege warfare. There were no armories, and no signs of the hasty construction that often accompanies desperate defense. Moreover, the artifacts found at Machu Picchu, delicate ceramics, ceremonial objects, and fine textiles, suggested not a garrison, but a well-ordered settlement devoted to ritual and residence. The skeletons uncovered were mostly women and children, further evidence that this was a place of community, not combat. As Bingham studied the reports of earlier explorers, he realized that the chronicles of Vila Bamba described a location deeper in the jungle, much farther northwest of Cusco. His heart resisted the conclusion, but the facts grew harder to ignore. Machu Picchu was not Vila Bamba. In time, he accepted this view, though reluctantly. He revised his published accounts, acknowledging that the city had likely been built in the mid-1400s as a royal estate, perhaps for Emperor Pachacuti, the visionary who expanded the Inca Empire to its greatest extent. While this revelation adjusted the story, it did nothing to diminish Machu Picchu's wonder. If anything, it heightened the mystery. Why would Pachacuti choose such a remote site for his estate? What ceremonies unfolded in the temples that crowned the ridge? And why, after less than a century of occupation, did its residents abandon it? To answer these questions, Bingham turned to the broader context of Inca civilization. He corresponded with ethnographers who had studied Quechua oral traditions, searching for any reference to a citadel in the clouds. Some legends spoke of a place called Patalacta, a town above the clouds built for the emperor's repose. Others told of secret sanctuaries where priests communed with the sun and the spirits of the mountains. Yet none of these stories matched Machu Picchu in every detail. The site seemed to defy easy classification. It was both a fortress and a palace, a farm and a temple. While Bingham wrestled with these uncertainties, his colleagues focused on the practical work of cataloging. Boxes of artifacts arrived in New Haven, where they were unpacked and labeled by graduate students. Every fragment of pottery and every textile scrap offered a glimpse into daily life in the city. The ceramics showed a blend of styles. Classic Inca forms mingled with regional influences from the Vila Bamba Valley. This suggested that the inhabitants included not only nobles from Cusco, but also artisans and farmers drawn from across the empire. The textiles, though fragmentary, revealed intricate weaving techniques. Brightly dyed patterns hinted at a symbolic language that scholars only partly understood. In Inca society, clothing was more than decoration. It signified status, clan identity, and even the wearer's role in rituals. Among the most compelling finds are the metal tools, bronze chisels, knives, and ornaments of copper and silver. These objects testified to the sophistication of Inca metallurgy, an art that blended utility with beauty. As evidence accumulated, Bingham began to grasp the city's deeper significance. Machu Picchu was not simply an isolated curiosity. It was a material expression of a culture that understood how to build in harmony with a harsh landscape, how to align temples to celestial events, and how to weave community life into the rhythms of mountain seasons. In lectures across America, he shared this insight. He described how the city's terraces mirrored the slopes of the Andes, how its shrines faced sacred peaks, and how its builders harnessed the flow of rainwater instead of fighting it. Audiences were captivated, yet controversy persisted. The removal of artifacts continued to provoke debate. Peruvian officials, emboldened by public support, demanded that many objects be returned. Bingham argued that he had acted within the law and with the approval of the government at the time. Still, the tension foreshadowed the ethical challenges that would define archaeology in the 20th century. Behind the headlines, Bingham himself grappled with more personal questions. Had he truly discovered Machu Picchu? The Quechua farmers who guided him in 1911 had always known the city existed. Even the name was not new. Machu Picchu simply meant Old Peak in Quechua. Over time, Bingham came to see his role differently. He had not discovered the city in the sense of being the first to find it, but rather he had introduced it to global consciousness. His expedition had lifted the veil, making Machu Picchu part of a shared human story. He reflected on this in his writing. Though centuries had passed and jungles had closed in, the spirit of the place endured. It awaited only a curious eye to recognize its grandeur. By the end of 1915, Bingham felt his work was nearly complete. He had mapped the city, excavated its buildings, and shaped a narrative that would endure long after he was gone. Yet the ruins themselves remained unchanged. They did not care for the arguments of scholars or the claims of governments. In the dawn light, the stones still glowed the same pale gold they had in Pachacuty's time. They belonged to no one and everyone. In the next chapter, we will follow the legacy of Bingham's expeditions and how Machu Picchu became a symbol of Peru's identity and a wonder recognized across the world. Chapter 8. A city becomes a symbol. As the 1920s dawned, Machu Picchu had transformed from an obscurity into an emblem. The photographs Bingham and Harry Foote had taken were circulating in newspapers, journals, and lecture halls across continents. In classrooms, children saw images of the terraces and temples and learned to pronounce the name of a place their grandparents had never heard of. Yet, even as the city gained fame, the question of who owned its story and its treasures grew sharper. Peru, newly conscious of its heritage in the wake of independence movements and a rising sense of national identity, began to see Machu Picchu as more than an archaeological site. It was a symbol of a proud civilization that had flourished long before Spanish conquest. In Lima, intellectuals and journalists argued that the Inca achievements deserved recognition on their own terms, not as curiosities displayed in European or American museums. Editorials appeared in the papers. What is the price of heritage? Should our ancestors' legacy be scattered across foreign archives? For Bingham, these questions were complicated. He respected the sentiment behind them, yet he believed sincerely that Yale could care for the artifacts better. His letters to the Peruvian government outlined his view that scientific study benefited all humanity. But beneath the polite language, he must have sensed that no argument would fully settle the matter. As debates simmered, Machu Picchu itself began to draw visitors. What had once required weeks of mule trains and machetes now demanded only determination and time. Tourists from Cusco hired guides to lead them along the river and up the mountain. They marveled at the vastness of the terraces, the precision of the stonework, the feeling of standing in a city in the clouds. Writers compared it to Pompeii, another place frozen in time. Some called it the lost city of the Incas, though the phrase was misleading. It had never truly been lost to the Quechua, who remembered its paths even when outsiders did not. Meanwhile, archaeologists continued to probe the site's mysteries. As new excavations uncovered more pottery and tools, the picture of Machu Picchu became richer. They found evidence that the site had been occupied seasonally, with royal retinues coming during certain times of year to perform ceremonies and manage affairs. In the dry season, when the rains receded, the emperor's household could retreat to Machu Picchu to escape the politics of Cusco and to honor the sacred mountains. Studies of the terraces showed sophisticated agricultural planning. Crops were rotated to prevent soil exhaustion, and irrigation channels distributed water evenly. Analysis of pollen and plant remains revealed maize, potatoes, and coca leaves, staples and sacred plants alike. As scholars pieced together these clues, Machu Picchu became more than a curiosity. It was a microcosm of Inca civilization, blending engineering, agriculture, astronomy, and religion into a single landscape. In 1922, Bingham published Inca Land, expanding his earlier accounts into a sweeping narrative. The book combined adventure, scholarship, and personal reflection. For many readers, it was their first window into the Andes. Yet in Peru, public opinion was shifting. Nationalists criticized Bingham for the removal of artifacts. They argued that even if the export had been legal under the agreements of the time, it was wrong in spirit. Each crate of pottery represented not just material culture, but a connection to ancestors, to identity, to belonging. The dispute took years to resolve. While negotiations unfolded, the site itself continued to inspire. Artists painted Machu Picchu bathed in sunset light. Poets described the stones as eternal witnesses. Schoolchildren learned its name as a point of pride. By the 1930s, a trickle of travelers had become a steady stream. The Peruvian government recognized that Machu Picchu held not only historical importance, but economic potential. Investment in infrastructure began, better roads, improved access routes, and eventually a railway that would bring thousands of visitors each year. The irony was clear. In the very act of making Machu Picchu accessible to the world, its solitude was forever changed. But this, too, was part of its story, a place once hidden now woven into the global imagination. Even Bingham's own perspective evolved. As he grew older, he became less certain of the interpretations he had once proclaimed. He conceded that Machu Picchu was probably not Vila Bamba. He acknowledged that others would discover more about its purpose than he ever could. But he never doubted the city's power. He wrote, "No matter how many scholars debate its meaning, Machu Picchu will always stand beyond the reach of final explanation. Its stones belong not only to history, but to wonder." He returned to Peru a final time in the late 1930s, no longer as a young explorer, but as a man nearing the end of his career. Standing once more on the terraces, he felt the same awe he had felt decades before. The wind moved through the grass, the clouds drifted across the peaks, and the stones waited in their quiet constancy. In the years after Bingham's last visit, Machu Picchu's fame only grew. It became a symbol of Peru's resilience, a reminder that even empires that fall leave something enduring behind. When World War II began, travel to the Andes slowed, but the idea of Machu Picchu never disappeared. Soldiers carried books and photographs with them, dreaming of the mountains they might someday visit. Writers continued to evoke the citadel as a metaphor for hidden beauty and lost knowledge. In the next chapter, we will follow the post-war years as Machu Picchu became the site of pilgrimage for scientists, poets, and travelers alike, and as debates over heritage continue to shape its destiny. Chapter 9. Pilgrims of the Modern Age. When the Second World War ended in 1945, a changed world turned its attention back to old questions. Among them was Machu Picchu, the city on the ridge, which had begun to seem almost mythical to readers who had encountered it only in books and magazines during wartime. With peace came renewed curiosity. Scholars, artists, and adventurers from Europe and America arrived in Lima, determined to see the citadel for themselves. The journey, while easier than it had been in Bingham's day, remained a kind of pilgrimage. Travelers rode steam trains along the Urubamba River, then hiked the final miles up switchbacks through cloud forest and orchid-laden cliffs. Those first post-war visitors often wrote of the sense of entering a world apart. Unlike other famous ruins, Pompeii, Angkor, Karnak, Machu Picchu retained an air of the intact. The stones were still there, the terraces still caught the morning sun, and the clouds still rose each dawn to veil the city in mystery. In 1948, the Peruvian government formally declared Machu Picchu a National Historic Sanctuary, recognizing it as a site of exceptional cultural and spiritual value. This status placed new responsibilities on caretakers, who began implementing preservation measures to protect the fragile walls and terraces from the growing influx of visitors. It was not only archaeologists who came. Poets wandered the paths in search of inspiration. One of them was the Chilean Nobel laureate Pablo Neruda, who visited the site in 1943 and later composed a celebrated poem cycle titled Alturas de Machu Picchu. In those verses, Neruda imagined the voices of the builders, anonymous hands that carved the stairways and shaped the stones. Stone upon stone, and man, where was he? Air upon air, and man, where was he? Time upon time, and man, where was he? His poetry expressed something that scholars often struggled to convey: the feeling that Machu Picchu was both a monument and a question, a city built by people whose names had faded but whose achievement endured. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, research continued in earnest. New surveys mapped the site more precisely. Excavations in the residential sectors uncovered domestic implements, grinding stones, cooking vessels, tools, shedding light on the daily lives of those who had lived among the terraces. The interpretation of Machu Picchu also began to evolve. Where Bingham had emphasized the possibility of a military refuge, later scholars shifted their focus to its ceremonial and astronomical functions. Careful studies of solar alignments revealed how the Incas had oriented buildings to track the movements of the sun and stars. The Intihuatana, the enigmatic hitching post of the sun, received particular attention. Researchers discovered that on the equinox, the sun cast a perfect shadow along the carved ridge of the stone. To the Inca priests, this alignment likely marked sacred time, moments when the boundaries between worlds grew thin and the living communed with the divine. These findings were more than academic. They contributed to a growing sense that Machu Picchu was a place of profound spiritual significance. For many Peruvians, it became a touchstone of identity, a reminder that the Andes had birthed a civilization as sophisticated as any in the Old World. Yet even as understanding deepened, the pressures of tourism intensified. By the late 1960s, thousands of visitors were arriving each year. The footpaths wore grooves into the stone steps. Humidity from countless breaths began to erode delicate mortar. Recognizing the danger, the Peruvian government established stricter regulations. Guides were trained to protect vulnerable areas, and limits were placed on how many people could enter each day. But balancing preservation and access proved an ongoing challenge, one that would only grow in the decades to follow. Meanwhile, the the dispute over the artifacts Bingham had taken continued. In Peru, a new generation of scholars and policymakers argued that these objects were part of a heritage too precious to remain abroad. They cited not only national pride, but the principle that cultural patrimony should be preserved within the land where it originated. Yale University, for its part, maintained that the artifacts had been removed legally with government permission. Correspondents from the early 20th century supported this claim, but critics countered that the agreements had been made under unequal circumstances when Peru's institutions were young and lacked leverage. The arguments reflected broader shifts in the world's thinking about archaeology and ownership. Across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, nations were demanding the return of cultural treasures long held in European and American museums. Machu Picchu became one of the most visible examples of this struggle, a case study in how discovery, scholarship, and colonial legacies could collide. Amid these debates, the citadel itself remained indifferent. The sun rose over Huayna Picchu as it always had, casting light across the terraces. The clouds drifted down the valley and parted to reveal the same walls Bingham had first glimpsed in 1911. For the travelers who made their way there, it was impossible not to feel humbled. Some described Machu Picchu as a place that changed them, where time slowed, where the imagination could roam freely among the stones. One visitor, writing in the 1970s, put it simply, "Here, the past is not past. It lives in every carved block, every terrace, every breath of the mountain air." By then, Machu Picchu was no longer merely an archaeological site. It had become a pilgrimage destination, a cultural symbol, and an icon recognized across the globe. In the next chapter, we will follow the efforts to protect Machu Picchu in the modern era, and how the question of who owns the past continued to shape its story. Chapter 10. Protecting the Legacy. By the 1980s, Machu Picchu had become a magnet for travelers of every background: historians, artists, hikers, and those simply seeking the intangible wonder of a place suspended between earth and sky. But with fame came a paradox. The very popularity that spread knowledge of the citadel also threatened its survival. The Peruvian authorities recognized the challenge early. A series of studies commissioned by the Ministry of Culture revealed how foot traffic was damaging the ancient stones. Each year, the narrow pathways leading to the Temple of the Sun grew more worn. Lichen thrived in the humid breath of thousands of visitors. Sections of wall, long stable, began to shift under the cumulative weight of shoes and hands. In response, a preservation plan took shape. It was a collaboration between Peruvian archaeologists, international conservationists, and UNESCO, which in 1983 declared Machu Picchu a World Heritage Site. This designation brought resources and expertise, but also imposed new responsibilities. Guidelines were developed to limit the number of visitors per day. Trails were reinforced with discrete supports, and vulnerable terraces were closed to the public to allow vegetation to recover. At the same time, local communities were included in decision-making, a recognition that Machu Picchu was not only an archaeological treasure, but also part of living cultural landscapes. Even as conservation advanced, the dispute over Bingham's artifacts continued. In the late 20th century, a new generation of Peruvian officials renewed calls for their return. They argued that the crates of pottery, tools, and human remains stored at Yale were a patrimony belonging to all Peruvians. Negotiations stretched over decades. Each side cited legal precedents and historical documents. While Yale emphasized the agreement signed at the time of Bingham's expeditions, Peru stressed the broader ethical imperative to reunite artifacts with their place of origin. Public opinion, both in Peru and abroad, began to shift in favor of repatriation. The idea that cultural heritage should remain within its homeland gained traction globally, part of a wider reckoning with the legacies of colonial-era collecting. Meanwhile, Machu Picchu continued to enchant. New generations of archaeologists pursued questions Bingham could never have anticipated. Some used satellite imagery to map hidden terraces and paths beneath the jungle canopy. Others studied microstratigraphy, layer upon layer of soil deposits, to reconstruct centuries of agriculture and habitation. These efforts revealed that Machu Picchu was not as isolated as once believed. Instead, it formed part of a vast network of settlements and ceremonial sites stretching across the eastern Andes. The royal estate of Pachacuti was linked by roads and trails to smaller villages, each contributing labor, food, and tribute to sustain life on the high ridge. Researchers also came to appreciate the extraordinary engineering that had kept Machu Picchu intact. The foundations rested on carefully prepared gravel beds that absorbed seismic shocks. Retaining walls channeled rainwater safely downslope, preventing landslides. Even in the modern era, such solutions impress structural engineers. One report concluded that if Machu Picchu had been built with mortar alone, earthquakes and rains would have destroyed it long ago. Its survival was a testament to the Inca mastery of their environment, a legacy as relevant to contemporary builders as it was to historians. In the 1990s, as the world embraced a new digital age, Machu Picchu's image became ubiquitous. Travel magazines, websites, and television documentaries carried photographs of the citadel to every corner of the globe. For many, it became a bucket list destination, an emblem of adventure and discovery. Yet amid the surge of tourism, efforts intensified to balance access and preservation. The Inca Trail, once a little-known hiking route, became regulated by permit systems to limit erosion and overcrowding. Visitor centers were constructed to educate travelers on the site's significance and the need to tread lightly among the stones. By the early 2000s, Peru and Yale reached a tentative agreement regarding the artifacts. After years of negotiation, the university agreed to return most of the collection, recognizing that it belonged first and foremost to the Peruvian people. The repatriation was hailed as a milestone in cultural heritage policy, a sign that the old assumptions of ownership are giving way to principles of stewardship and respect. In 2011, nearly a century after Bingham's first expedition, the crates finally arrived in Cusco to great celebration. Indigenous leaders, students, and dignitaries gathered as the artifacts were placed in a newly built museum. For many Peruvians, it was not only a symbolic homecoming, but also a reaffirmation that their ancestors' achievements belonged to them. At the same time, Machu Picchu was increasingly recognized as more than an Inca relic. It was a living emblem of identity and continuity, visited not only by foreign tourists, but by Peruvians themselves, many of whom traced their ancestry to the highlands. Ceremonies marking the winter solstice drew crowds who came to honor Inti, the sun god, as their ancestors had. Quechua songs once more echoed across the terraces. The old pathways became bridges between past and present. Visitors who arrived at dawn often described the same feeling of quiet wonder that Bingham had experienced in 1911. The light slid across the terraces, illuminating the temple of the sun. Mists rose, parted, and drifted away. And for a moment, it was possible to believe the city had never been abandoned, that the Inca architects had simply stepped aside, leaving their work for others to admire. As the 21st century unfolded, Machu Picchu stood resilient, an Andean masterpiece weathering time, curiosity, and the inexhaustible human desire to know what lies beyond the next ridge. In the next chapter, we will explore how Machu Picchu has inspired science, art, and spiritual journeys in the modern age, and how its story continues to shape our understanding of the past. Chapter 11. The Citadel and the Imagination. As Machu Picchu entered the 21st century, its hold on the world's imagination only deepened. Though scholars had mapped every building and measured every terrace, the city remained a living symbol, more than the sum of its stones. Writers, filmmakers, and artists found in the citadel a ready metaphor, a place where time seemed to fold in on itself, where the past was never entirely past. Documentaries framed it as the ultimate destination for seekers of lost worlds. Novelists set stories among its ruins, inventing characters who search for answers among the mossy walls. One of the most famous works of this period was The Heights of Machu Picchu, the English edition of Pablo Neruda's poetic cycle. His verses, first penned decades earlier, were reissued with new photographs that brought his imagery to life. For readers worldwide, the poems offered an emotional doorway into the city, a reminder that archaeology was not just about facts, but about the feeling of wonder. The citadel also drew scientists seeking to learn from Inca engineering. In the 2000s, teams of hydrologists studied the water channels that laced the terraces and plazas. They discovered that the Inca had created a system of fountains and drains capable of managing both the torrential rains of the wet season and the scarcity of the dry months. This insight had practical applications. Urban planners from Japan, faced with flood management challenges, cited Machu Picchu as a model of sustainable design. Workshops in Cusco brought together engineers and traditional builders to discuss how ancient techniques could inform modern infrastructure. Yet beyond scholarship, Machu Picchu became a stage for personal transformation. Spiritual seekers traveled there to meditate, practice yoga at dawn, or participate in solstice ceremonies honoring the sun and the mountains. Though such practices sometimes blurred the line between cultural respect and appropriation, they reflected a universal yearning to touch something enduring. For Peruvians, the citadel became an emblem of national pride and resilience. The government invested in education programs that taught children the story of Pachacuti, the emperor who may have built Machu Picchu. Textbooks describe how Quechua engineers shaped the city without iron tools or wheels. Each lesson reaffirmed the brilliance of ancestors whose achievements had once been ignored or diminished. As these initiatives grew, a parallel effort focused on empowering local communities. In the villages of the Sacred Valley, tourism provided livelihoods but also presented challenges: rising prices, environmental strain, and cultural change. To address this, heritage organizations worked with farmers and artisans to create sustainable enterprises that shared the benefits more equitably. One example was the training of local guides fluent in Quechua and Spanish. These guides offered visitors not only facts, but the perspectives of people whose families had lived in the region for generations. Their storytelling blended scholarly knowledge with oral traditions, making the history of Machu Picchu feel immediate and alive. In the midst of all this, the site continued to evolve as an object of scientific fascination. Advances in drone technology allowed researchers to survey hard-to-reach sections of the ridge, revealing remnants of additional terraces hidden beneath dense vegetation. Some believed that more discoveries awaited, perhaps even earlier phases of construction that predated Pachacuti himself. Meanwhile, preservation remained an unending task. Earthquakes and heavy rains tested the ancient retaining walls. Park administrators faced the constant dilemma: how to share Machu Picchu with millions without eroding the very things that made it precious. In 2007, Machu Picchu was named one of the new 7 wonders of the world in a global poll. The announcement was celebrated with fireworks in Lima and ceremonies in Cusco. For many Peruvians, it was validation that the city their ancestors built had finally been recognized on the grandest stage. But fame also carried risks. Visitor numbers surged even higher, straining the trails and infrastructure. UNESCO issued warnings that the site could lose its World Heritage status if conservation did not keep pace. The Peruvian government responded with new regulations: time slots to limit crowding, mandatory guide accompaniment, and restrictions on where tourists could walk. Some travelers protested the rules, but most understood the need to protect the fragile terraces from irreversible harm. Throughout these debates, Machu Picchu remained serenely indifferent. At sunrise, the light spilled across the Temple of the Three Windows, as it always had. The call of the Andean condor echoed above the peaks. The ancient stones held their secrets, revealing just enough to keep curiosity alive. Visitors from every country continued to arrive, each carrying their own questions. What had life been like in these stone houses? What rituals had unfolded at the Intihuatana? Why had the city been abandoned when it seemed so perfectly designed to endure? The answers, when they came, were always partial. Each discovery spawned new mysteries. Each theory left room for debate. In this way, Machu Picchu fulfilled a role larger than any single narrative. It became a place where humanity could confront the limits of knowledge and the wonder of what remains unknown. In the next chapter, we will trace the personal journeys of those who have been changed by Machu Picchu, from archaeologists to poets, pilgrims to engineers, and explore how their experiences continue to shape the citadel story. Chapter 12: Pilgrims of Many Paths. In the decades since Hiram Bingham first glimpsed Machu Picchu, countless travelers had made their own journeys up the ridge. Some arrived as scholars, intent on solving the city's riddles. Others came as tourists seeking beauty or as seekers yearning for spiritual renewal. Over time, each of these paths added new layers to the citadel's story. One of the most compelling aspects of Machu Picchu was how it drew such a diversity of people. Historians arrived with notebooks and cameras, eager to document the tiniest architectural details. Botanists came to study orchids clinging to the terraces and bromeliads that thrived in the damp crevices between stones. Then there were the artists. Painters set up easels in the early dawn, striving to capture the shifting colors of mist and light. Photographers camped for days to record the precise moment when the sun crested Huayna Picchu, casting long shadows across the Temple of the Sun. Among the most determined visitors were the hikers who walked the Inca Trail. For them, the experience was not only about reaching the ruins, but about retracing the steps of messengers and pilgrims who had once carried tribute to the emperor. Over 4 days, the trail wound through cloud forest, crossed high passes, and descended into verdant valleys. Each switchback offered glimpses of the Andes stretching to the horizon. For many, the final approach to the Sun Gate, into Punku, was the culmination of both effort and anticipation. From that vantage point, Machu Picchu appeared suddenly in full view, poised between green slopes and drifting clouds. Some travelers wept at the sight, overcome by the feeling of having touched something beyond ordinary life. Yet not all journeys were physical. Writers found in Machu Picchu a canvas for their imaginations. Novelist Isabel Allende once described it as a city where stone remembers. Her words echoed the sentiment of countless others who sensed that the walls held stories too large to be fully told. Poets wrote of the silence between stones, of the ghosts who might still walk the terraces at night. One described Machu Picchu as a cathedral without a roof, a place where sky and earth met in perpetual dialogue. The citadel also inspired scientists whose work seemed, at first glance, far removed from ancient walls. Engineers studied the way the terraces managed erosion. Hydrologists examined the channels that carried rainwater without causing landslides. Even climatologists found value in the records preserved by centuries of agricultural layers. Their research yielded practical benefits. In villages across the Andes, farmers experimented with restoring traditional terracing to combat soil loss and improve crop yields. In this way, Machu Picchu was not merely a museum of the past, but a living source of knowledge for the present. Amid all these pursuits, the question of preservation remained urgent. By the early 2010s, visitor numbers had grown beyond what Bingham could have imagined. Some years saw over 1 million people climbing the paths and photographing the stones. This popularity brought economic opportunities for local communities, but also strains on infrastructure and the environment. Trash accumulated in hidden corners. Trails wore into ruts. The delicate balance between access and protection became more precarious each season. In response, UNESCO and Peruvian authorities implemented a series of protective measures. New rules limited how long visitors could stay and where they could walk. Entry was divided into time slots, with guides required for most areas. Some travelers found the regulations frustrating. They wanted the freedom to explore as Bingham had, wandering unhurried among the terraces. But most understood that without these restrictions, the very magic that drew them to Machu Picchu would be lost. Throughout this period, Quechua communities near the citadel continued their own engagement with the site. For them, Machu Picchu was more than an archaeological wonder. It was a place woven into ancestral memory. Solstice ceremonies drew elders and children alike to the main plaza, where offerings of coca leaves and chicha honored the mountain spirits. These rituals were not performances for tourists, but expressions of continuity. A reminder that the Inca worldview persisted despite centuries of disruption. In the quiet hours before dawn, when most visitors were still asleep in hotels, local guides sometimes climbed the ridge alone. They would stand at the edge of the Temple of the Sun, feeling the wind funnel through the mountains. In those moments, the citadel belonged not to any single country or institution, but to all who approached it with respect. One guide, interviewed by a journalist, said simply, "This place is alive. You can read it in books, you can look at pictures, but until you stand here, you don't understand." Indeed, Machu Picchu had become a kind of mirror. Each traveler saw something different: an engineering marvel, a spiritual refuge, a symbol of lost worlds, a testament to human creativity. For historians, it offered an inexhaustible archive of evidence waiting to be deciphered. For poets, it was an inspiration beyond words. For conservationists, it was a test of our ability to honor the past while stewarding it for the future. And for the Quechua people, it was a place that could never be fully claimed or explained, a sacred landscape whose power would outlast any single story. In the next chapter, we will explore how Machu Picchu entered the digital age and how new technologies have both illuminated and complicated our understanding of the citadel in the clouds. Chapter 13, The Digital Citadel. As the 21st century advanced, the world grew smaller. The internet, once a novelty, became an indispensable part of daily life. And with that digital revolution, Machu Picchu entered a new phase of its existence, one that no Inca or early explorer could have imagined. Long before most travelers booked a flight to Peru, they now encountered the citadel online. Virtual tours offered 360-degree panoramas of the terraces and temples. High-definition drone footage revealed hidden angles that even the most intrepid hikers could not easily see. In classrooms from Tokyo to Cape Town, children learned about Machu Picchu through interactive lessons. Teachers projected 3D reconstructions on whiteboards, guiding students through the Temple of the Three Windows and the Royal Tomb with a click of a mouse. This democratization of access brought undeniable benefits. No longer did knowledge of Machu Picchu belong only to scholars or those wealthy enough to travel. Anyone with an internet connection could glimpse the citadel's grandeur and learn the basic contours of its story. Yet the digital proliferation also posed new questions. What did it mean for a place to exist simultaneously as a fragile physical site and as an endlessly replicable image? Was something lost when Machu Picchu became just another backdrop for social media? Selfies posted beside ancient walls, hashtags accumulating by the millions? For Peru's cultural authorities, the challenge lay in harnessing technology to deepen appreciation rather than to flatten it. Partnerships with international universities produced virtual reality experiences that emphasize conservation as much as spectacle. Online exhibits explained the delicate engineering that sustained the terraces, the astronomical alignments encoded in the stonework, and the centuries of Quechua stewardship that had preserved the site long before Bingham's arrival. Meanwhile, archaeologists continued to integrate new tools into their research. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, transformed the study of the wider Machu Picchu landscape. Using airborne laser scanners, researchers could penetrate the dense jungle canopy and detect subtle traces of ancient infrastructure. Forgotten terraces, hidden trails, and irrigation channels swallowed by centuries of growth. These findings reinforce the idea that Machu Picchu was never an isolated outpost. Rather, it was part of a vast, interconnected network of settlements and ceremonial centers. The citadel's prominence in modern memory was partly an accident of preservation. Other sites have been destroyed, or reclaimed by the forest, leaving Machu Picchu to stand as their surrogate. For the Quechua communities living nearby, the digital age offered both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, heritage tourism provided vital income. Families sold woven textiles, pottery, and organic coffee to visitors eager for authentic souvenirs. Young people found work as guides and translators. On the other hand, the flood of images online sometimes obscured the living culture behind the ruins. To counter this, community leaders developed educational initiatives that highlighted contemporary Quechua traditions alongside Inca history. Festivals, agricultural fairs, and language workshops all became part of a broader effort to ensure that the past did not eclipse the present. One elder, speaking to a Peruvian documentary crew, explained, "Machu Picchu is not just a monument. It is part of our story that continues. If tourists understand this, they will respect it more." Beyond the Andes, Machu Picchu's digital presence continued to inspire creative expression. In Europe, artists projected holograms of the citadel onto gallery walls. In the United States, composers wrote orchestral pieces evoking the rhythm of Andean terraces. In China, architects cited Inca stonework as a model for earthquake-resistant design. And still, the stream of physical visitors grew. By the 2010s, over 1.5 million people a year arrived. To manage this unprecedented volume, the Peruvian government introduced further restrictions, dividing the day into timed entry slots, mandating official guides for groups, creating designated walking circuits to spread foot traffic. These measures were controversial among some tour operators, but most conservation experts agreed they were essential. Without controls, the city risked erosion, structural damage, and a loss of the very atmosphere that made it special. The tension between access and protection, knowledge and mystery, was not new. Even in Bingham's time, questions had swirled around ownership and responsibility. What the digital age made clear was that these debates were far from over. Yet in the early mornings, before the gates opened, Machu Picchu remained much as it had always been. The first light touched the ridge, illuminating the Temple of the Sun in a glow that no photograph could fully replicate. The wind carried the scent of orchids down the terraces, and the stones waited, as they had for centuries, for new visitors to arrive. One conservationist put it succinctly: "You can digitize the images, you can simulate the experience, but nothing replaces the feeling of being here. The moment when you understand this city was never truly lost. It was waiting for you to look." In the next chapter, we will trace how Machu Picchu has become not only a national symbol, but a global emblem, one that challenges us to ask what it means to remember, to preserve, and to belong. Chapter 14, The Global Symbol. By the 2010s, Machu Picchu had transcended its status as an archaeological wonder. It had become a symbol recognized across continents. An icon woven into the fabric of world culture, invoked in discussions of heritage, identity, and the responsibilities of remembrance. This transformation owed much to Peru's sustained efforts to claim and celebrate the citadel as a national emblem. School children recited lessons about Pachacuti and the engineers who had shaped the mountain. Tourism campaigns paired Machu Picchu's silhouette with the red and white of the Peruvian flag, reminding citizens and visitors alike that this was the heritage of a living people, not merely the inheritance of scholars. But the global embrace of Machu Picchu also introduced fresh paradoxes. For many foreign visitors, the site had become shorthand for the exotic, the remote, the ancient, concepts that often carried romantic assumptions. Some arrived expecting a pristine ruin untouched by modernity. Instead, they found a place where satellite phones chirped in the plazas and tour groups jostled for space along the terraces. Yet, even amid commercialization, something essential remained. Those who rose before dawn to climb the steps often described a hush that fell when the first light slid over the ridge. In that moment, as shadows retreated and the mountains revealed themselves in full, it was possible to feel the centuries collapse into a single breath. For the Peruvian government, Machu Picchu's prominence carried both opportunity and responsibility. Revenue from tourism became vital to funding infrastructure across Cusco and the Sacred Valley, schools, roads, clinics. At the same time, officials had to grapple with the environmental strain of mass visitation. The World Heritage status that had brought prestige also imposed obligations to protect, to educate, to balance present needs with the claims of the past. Community organizations stepped forward to help meet these challenges. In Ollantay Tambo, women's cooperatives began producing guidebooks and educational materials in Quechua and Spanish. In Aguascalientes, local committees debated how to improve waste management and ensure that profits from Machu Picchu flowed back into the villages whose ancestors once built the terraces. Abroad, Machu Picchu inspired conversations about cultural stewardship. Museums that once viewed ancient objects as trophies began to reconsider their policies. Universities re-examined collections acquired during the age of imperial expeditions. The long negotiation over Bingham's artifacts had set a precedent. No institution could claim to own the past unilaterally. These shifts were part of a broader reckoning with history's complexities. In classrooms and lecture halls, students now learned that archaeology was never a purely objective pursuit. It was also a story of power, of who controlled narratives, who received credit, and whose voices were left out. To counter these omissions, Quechua scholars and elders began recording oral histories that had circulated in their communities for generations. These accounts often describe Machu Picchu not as a lost city, but as a familiar landmark, known to locals long before outsiders took an interest. One elder explained, "My grandmother told me our people never forgot. We visited to leave offerings, to ask for blessings. It was the foreigners who thought it was a secret." Such perspectives challenged old narratives, reminding the world that discovery was not always the same as recognition. While Bingham had introduced Machu Picchu to global attention, he had not conjured it from oblivion. The citadel had endured in memory, tended by those who saw it as part of their living landscape. As this richer understanding took root, Machu Picchu's symbolism deepened. It was no longer merely an Inca wonder frozen in time. It became a testament to continuity, the capacity of human communities to persist, adapt, and reclaim their stories. For travelers, this complexity could be humbling. It required moving beyond the surface of postcards and social media. It demanded curiosity about the lives that unfolded on the terraces, the farmers, priests, builders, and weavers whose work had shaped each stone. Yet this very process of learning was what made Machu Picchu unique. Unlike a static monument behind glass, it remained open to interpretation. Each visitor carried away a different understanding, shaped by their questions, their wonder, their willingness to listen. By the late 2010s, technology continued to transform how people experience the site. Apps offered guided audio tours in multiple languages. Augmented reality overlays revealed how the city might have looked in the 15th century. Online platforms connected travelers with Quechua guides and artisans before they even set foot on the trail. Some worried that these innovations diluted the sense of discovery. Others argued they enriched it by bridging gaps in knowledge. Either way, Machu Picchu's status as a global symbol seemed secure, a place that, in an age of constant novelty, retained the power to arrest attention. Perhaps that was its greatest legacy. For all the debates over ownership and interpretation, for all the pressures of modern tourism, Machu Picchu remained an invitation to pause, to wonder, to acknowledge the ingenuity of those who came before. In the next chapter, we will explore how Machu Picchu endures as a living heritage, how the people of the Andes continue to find meaning in its stones, and how the world might learn from their example. Chapter 15, A Living Heritage. In the 21st century, Machu Picchu has become more than an archaeological marvel. It is a living testament to human resilience and imagination, an inheritance not confined to Peru but shared by the world. Yet for the Quechua communities of the Andes, the citadel has never been merely a symbol or a destination. It has always been part of a deeper, continuous story. On festival days, this continuity is unmistakable. Each June, during the winter solstice, elders, musicians, and families ascend the ridge to honor Inti, the sun god. As the first rays of light spill over the peaks, offerings of coca leaves, flowers, and maize are laid upon stone altars. The chants that rise in Quechua echo the same reverence that once guided the builders who fitted each block with such precision. For those who stand quietly on the terraces, these ceremonies reveal something often lost amid crowds and camera flashes. Machu Picchu is not a relic frozen in time, but a place where old and new intersect. The rituals are neither reenactments nor performances. They are acts of remembrance and renewal, affirming that the spirit of the Andes endures. Scholars who have spent decades studying the citadel have come to recognize this truth. They speak less of discovery and more of encounter, acknowledging that long before Bingham's expeditions, local farmers and herders knew the paths and plazas. Oral traditions, once dismissed as folklore, have been revalued as essential records of how memory can outlast empires. In villages like Vila Bamba and Chinchero, community museums now house exhibitions that celebrate Inca ingenuity and the knowledge passed down through generations. Children learn to weave textiles whose motifs recall the steppe terraces and sacred mountains. In schoolyards, elders share stories of ancestors who labored in the clouds, tending crops and building walls that still defy time. For these communities, Machu Picchu is a touchstone, a reminder of the dignity and skill that flourished in an age before conquest. This perspective has inspired broader movements across Latin America to reclaim indigenous histories and assert cultural sovereignty. Where once textbooks emphasized European narratives, curricula now highlight the achievements of Inca engineers, astronomers, and farmers. Outside Peru, the citadel has become a mirror reflecting humanity's conflicting impulses, the urge to possess and the desire to protect, the hunger for novelty and the longing for connection. Millions visit each year seeking an experience that feels authentic, unaware that authenticity is not found in ruins alone, but in the voices that still speak for them. This realization has guided modern conservation strategies. No longer is preservation seen as the work of experts alone. Instead, it is a partnership between governments, researchers, indigenous communities, and visitors. Together, they strive to keep the site accessible without erasing its spirit. One example is the training of local guides who can interpret Machu Picchu's architecture, agriculture, and cosmology in Quechua and Spanish. Their tours are as much about cultural transmission as factual explanation, offering travelers a chance to see the city not simply as a ruin, but as an embodiment of living heritage. Technology, too, has played an unexpected role in sustaining this dialogue. Virtual classrooms connect students in Cusco with peers in Europe and North America, allowing them to share perspectives on why Machu Picchu matters. Augmented reality apps overlay reconstructed images onto the stones, helping visitors imagine how plazas once thrummed with activity. Yet in the end, no simulation can replace the moment of standing on the ridge as the sun rises. For many, that instant is transformative. The realization that centuries of history, of conquest, abandonment, rediscovery, have converged in a single view. This convergence is what keeps Machu Picchu from becoming a static monument. It is alive in the sense that it continues to shape how people see themselves and each other. To a Peruvian child learning the first lines of a Quechua hymn, it is a source of pride. To an archaeologist deciphering drainage channels, it is a reminder that knowledge can be rediscovered. To a traveler watching the dawn, it is proof that wonder endures. In the years since Bingham's expeditions, the world has debated what Machu Picchu is: a royal estate, a ceremonial center, a fortress. But perhaps its true meaning lies not in any single interpretation, but in its capacity to inspire questions. Questions about where we come from, what we value, and how we choose to remember. And so the citadel remains, poised between past and future, stone and sky. Each visitor who climbs the final steps becomes part of its unfolding story. A story that began long before it was called Machu Picchu and will continue long after today's travelers have departed. Thank you for joining this journey through the clouds, across the terraces, and into the heart of a civilization whose vision still humbles us. May the story of Machu Picchu remind us that heritage is not only what we inherit, but what we choose to honor and protect. Until our next exploration together, may curiosity always guide your path.